Hi, everyone. Welcome to Head Talks. So you know where we are, right? What are we right smack in the middle of? Kings and Queens of England. And I have decided to name today something maybe a little unexpected, because we're going to talk about somebody who had a significant and profound effect on England, and that person is who we're going to call right now the She-Wolf Queen. But before we get to the She-Wolf Queen, I have to get you up to speed, right? I have to get you all up to speed because it's really hard to remember from a whole week ago what we talked about last time we met, right? All right, so let's quickly go through the whole thing from last week so we can figure out where we are in time and space. So we were talking about young King Henry III, remember? Yeah. They had a French prince take over, and they thought, well, why would we have this French prince when we've got a very young heir to the throne, legitimate heir to the throne, and because he's so young, we can do what? Control him. Yes, we can have absolute control over him. And it's worse. Remember we talked about this last week? A young royal, the heir, does not grow up with his family. How does that happen? They grow up where? In their own household. And Henry III, he had a very ideal regent. Okay, he had William Wallace, who was a very noble and honest, decent man, had an excellent reputation, was devout to the throne. He was the perfect regent, the perfect one to take care of him. But who remembers how many years did that last? Yes, excellent, David. 2 years. So the young king, he is only under this tutelage from the age of 9 to 11. Remember that? So that's got to be very, very difficult. And then after William Marshall dies, he has a series of regents and people that are coming into his life. And they're coming and going. They're not all there the whole time. They come, they stay a little bit, they get assigned to something else, and so they wind up leaving. So he has very inconsistent relationships with those who would be a mentor for him and a role model. The only one that he was able to connect with, do you remember? The Archbishop of Canterbury, which is Stephen Langton. And you remember that it was Stephen Langton was the one that bad King John would not allow into the country? Remember that? Yeah, he wouldn't allow him into the country, but he survives and lives on long enough to really have an impact and an influence in the son, Henry III. So young Henry, having become attached to the Archbishop, he becomes what?
Very devout. Holy.
Very devout, yes. He becomes very, very devout. And if he could have had his choices, his own choices in life, he probably would have gone into the priesthood and would have been very happy. And sadly, I mean, that's what should have happened for this young person, but it didn't. He had a responsibility, and that responsibility was to the crown and the kingdom of England. And so he had to go into the politics of that. But when he did, and perhaps it's safe to assume because of all of these unstable relationships that he had, he was very indecisive, remember? Yeah, he would be. Yeah. he was the kind of person, that if you were talking to him, explaining something to him, then he was all on board with you. And then you leave the room and somebody else walks in and tells another point of view, and then now he's all on board with that person. He was just indecisive, couldn't make a decision, was strongly influenced by anybody that was around him. Now, when he got married, all right, he married Eleanor. We have lots and lots of Eleanors, okay? Like we have lots of Henrys and Edwards. Oh my gosh. So this is Eleanor of Provence, and she brings her family into this situation, right? And so who's he influenced by?
Eleanor.
Yes, he's influenced by Eleanor, but then he has his family, the Plantagenets, and do they want to have a say in things? Of course they do. So he's just like going back and forth. This guy just, But at least there's some hope for the future, because Eleanor and Henry, they do manage to agree on one thing at least, and that is that they must produce an heir. And so they do, and so we have Edward. Now remember, Henry III named his son Edward after Edward the Confessor, because Edward the Confessor was somebody he related to. Edward the Confessor, who was the last Anglo-Saxon king, was a very pious man and also would have preferred to have gone into the priesthood. In fact, having been the youngest son, that was the plan for him. But it didn't turn out that way. And so Henry made Edward the Confessor his patron saint and named his son after him. So now there's hope for the future, because we have a young heir to the throne, male heir to the throne, and so there's promise. There's promise. We will have to live through Henry III. But we've got Simon de Montfort. Remember, he's a very powerful baron, and he's not willing to wait until Henry dies and young Edward comes to the throne. He's not willing to wait. And so we have the Barons' War, remember?
Yeah.
Yes, we have the Barons' War from this. Simon de Montfort, you might recall, is Henry's brother-in-law. He married Henry's sister. So this is that side of the family, and that is in contrast to the French side, which is his wife's side, and so they're constantly at a battle. So de Montfort, he sets off the Second Barons' War, and when he does that, he captures not only Henry, but he also captures his son. Remember that? Yes. So he's got Henry. Henry has to be visible because he's the legitimate king. But what kind of a king is he under de Montfort? Yes, he's just a puppet king. And de Montfort has an insurance policy to make sure that Henry's going to do exactly what he tells him, right? And what is that insurance policy?
Baby.
Well, he's older now. Yeah, he's not a baby anymore.
Oh, the son.
Yeah, the son, yes. You've got Edward, the heir to the throne, in prison. And de Montfort is actually treating him not too badly. He's allowed to ride, remember that? And so while he's out riding, he plans this great escape. Do you remember? Yeah, so his guards are with him, of course, and he's tiring out all the guards' horses, and when he's thoroughly tired out those horses, he jumps on a fresh one, and he takes off. He takes off, and the guards can't chase him because he's exhausted all the other horses, and he gets away. Now, when he gets away, of course, he is heir to the throne, right? So does he get support? He does. He gets support, and he goes up against de Montfort, and what happens? Yes, de Montfort dies, and we've got young Edward, who has claimed victory for his father, because remember, his father's still alive. So he's claimed victory for his father. And we know this young Edward as who? Do you remember from last week? Yeah, Longshanks. Longshanks. So he's called Longshanks because he is 6'2", and the average height at that time is like 5'5" would have been, a tall person. So you can imagine he was just towering over everybody. Very impressive, very impressive. And they say he was good looking. All those Plantagenets were good looking, by the way. All right, so he's also had an arranged marriage, and this arranged marriage turned out to be really, really well. It was actually a love match. We have another Eleanor, but this one is Eleanor of Castile. And you remember from last week that she was pregnant 16 times. 16 times, and only 5 of those children survived. It's very sad. It's just really sad, even for those times. That is a lot of infant deaths. But he absolutely loved her, and she loved him. They did everything together. In fact, when he went on crusade, she went with him. Do you remember this? From last week? Do you remember a story comes from, the crusade didn't go well. But a story comes back with them, and that story was that he fought off an assassin. Do you remember it now? And the assassin had a knife that was tipped with poison. Yeah, so it was tipped with poison, and he was stabbed in the arm. And Eleanor, his wife, was there, thank goodness. Yes, because she sucked the poison out of the wound. So whether or not that's true, or whether they needed just a great story to come out of the crusade, we're not too sure. But it is a pretty good story, isn't it? So now he's on his way home, and during his voyage back to England, he gets the news. Remember the news he gets? That his father has passed away. Yes, that his father has passed away. And he does not rush back to England to claim the throne, which is exactly what everybody else would do, because the second there's a minute of transition in power, what might happen? Yeah. So normally when that happens, when there's even like hours, you go right back and you claim your heritage, your inheritance. But he doesn't, because remember, his grandfather John made so many mistakes, right? So what Edward's going to do is he's going to learn from his grandfather's mistakes. And the first thing he does is he goes to see the Pope. He goes to Rome, he sees the Pope, all right, and he pledges to the Pope. He offers a very nice donation to the Pope. And is that a smart thing to do? Yes. It's a very smart thing to do. And then the second thing he does before he goes home is he makes a little stop in France, because he's also a duke in French lands, right? They still have some land in France. And so if you are the duke, what are you supposed to do with the king of France? Yes, exactly. You have to pay homage. And so he does do that, which his grandfather would not do, refused to do. And then after he's made all of these brilliant tactical political moves, then he goes and he becomes crowned in 1274. He continues on with his tactical political moves, and if you recall from last week, he calls Parliament together. He does it over 20 times. And his predecessors, this is a brand new thing anyways, but his predecessors weren't going to do that, because Parliament is a result of Magna Carta, as you remember. And it is giving the barons what? some authority, power. Exactly. You're all right. You're all right. And so him having done it so many times, he's saying to them, I want your counsel. And so that was a very wise move. He also did something really important. He's at the very beginning. Remember, since the time of William the Conqueror, what happened to the English culture?
They were required to be French.
It was gone. Exactly, Edith. They were required to be French. Look what Edward Longshanks is doing. He's starting to bring in some pageantry, right? He's starting to bring in some pride and some sense of being English. And he is the first king that not only has learned the language, but he will speak the language a little bit at some of these ceremonies where he's displaying this pageantry. And then to even add more to this. This was really brilliant. He claimed to have found the bones of King Arthur and Guinevere. You just don't get more English than that. And so he and Eleanor, so they're representing themselves as Arthur and Guinevere by doing this. They have a parade of bringing the bones back into England, into Westminster. All right, and as I said, he is speaking the language, the ancient Old English language. He also does something else, if you might recall. He is the very first. Yes, exactly, Esther. So he is the first one. He's gone into Wales and he is become dominant and conquering that and settling that. And then to solidify that, he has made his son what? Yep, Prince of Wales. So we have it's because of Edward that we have the very first Prince of Wales. His son becomes the Prince of Wales. And then Edward also is very famous for his encounter with Braveheart. Yeah, so it's this one king. Do you believe this man's life? I mean, he's done all this. Okay, so he is the one that comes up against William Wallace, who we know of as Braveheart. I hear that this movie is not historically correct. So I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I really don't know. I don't know. I can't recommend it. I haven't seen it. But he does. He is the one that goes up against William Wallace. Now, the interesting thing about Scotland is Edward had made arrangements to unite Scotland and England. Do you remember this story from last week? Yeah. It's really sad. So his son was supposed to marry Margaret of Norway. Do you remember that? And that would have united Scotland and England, but Margaret did not survive the voyage to Scotland, and because she died, of course, the marriage obviously didn't happen, and this uniting Scotland and England does not happen now for hundreds of years, right? Doesn't happen until we have James. So, because this didn't happen, we've got these two guys right here, and they're duking it out, correct? Edward was supposed to go up there and mediate. He was actually going to back this guy, but we know Robert the Bruce as the one who rose up to become victorious there. But he didn't get a chance to get up there. Do you remember why? His wife that he loved so much, remember, she passed away? And he was devastated. He was devastated, and he went into a very deep mourning over her, and he wanted to honor her. And last week I had showed you the monuments. He had erected 12 monuments in her honor from the procession from, I forget where they started out, but then they went to Westminster. And there are 12 monuments. 3 are still in existence today. He was doing that, and so he was delayed getting up to Scotland. When he did arrive up there to put down all these fights, he was no longer interested in mediating. He was going to do what?
Become an overlord.
I'm just gonna, you know what, you guys, I'm just taking over. I'm just taking over. That's it. So they had a little issue with that. They had a problem with that. And because they had a problem with that, he had to come down even harder on them. And you might remember from last week that he stole their yes, yes, he took it. He took it away from them. This is their relic, their identity, their icon. He took it away from them, just to establish his authority over them. Took their pride, and oh my gosh, I don't know why that bothers me so much, but it does. And he took it away from them, and it did not go back to them until 1996. 1996, it was returned to them. I know. All right, so because of his domineering Scotland, he is also known as what? Yes, Hammer of the Scots. But they didn't stop, did they? They kept going and going and going. He didn't finish. He didn't finish the job because he couldn't. Because, that little hiccup that comes along. He died. So he died at the age of 68, and so he was not able to finish that job. And so now we have the whole legend of Robert the Bruce, which we won't go into because that's a whole other thing. Okay. So what we need to talk about today, though, is Edward II. So Edward Longshanks dies. He has his heir, Edward II, and we can all agree that Edward Longshanks did a lot of pretty great things and made some really brilliant moves, right? So his son must have inherited that intellect. Oh my gosh. Remember Bad King John? Well, we're going to decide today if Edward II is worse than Bad King John. You tell me what you think after I tell you this story. So it doesn't even start off very well. What do you have to know if you are going to be king? What's the most important thing?
Army. Military.
Yes, you have to have military skills. You have to understand battle. You have to be able to go into battle and win wars because it's all about the power. And what do you need? The land. The land. It's all about the land. So you have to conquer lands. Everything is about the land. All right, but he was not interested in this, okay? He was called lazy. He wasn't interested. For some reason, he didn't want to do this. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why he wouldn't want to do that. So he wasn't too crazy about this. And so his father, Edward Longshanks, is concerned about him. And he brings in a great tournament champion, all right? He's a great tournament champion. Pierce Gaverston is his name, and so he brings this young man in to work with his son, and he does, and his son is really enjoying this friendship, but it turned into something a little concerning. All right? So here's the father who brings in this tough guy, tournament champion, to influence his son, is suddenly feeling like, I may have made a mistake here. And so he's concerned that the influence is not what he had in mind. And so what does he do with Gaveston?
Kicks him out.
Yeah, you've got to go back to France, or the continent. You have to go back. So he has exiled him. All right, now I don't want you to worry, because the father, he's a smart guy. He did more than exile Gaveston. He's also arranged for a marriage, right? Oh, you have no idea. All right, so he's arranged for a marriage. Now, this is Isabella of France. All right, and it's good for having an heir and all of that, but with the tensions between England and France, what do you think this does? It's intended to bring them together, right? To build that alliance, to heal that wound. Remember, they've been fighting. Remember, John lost all that land? Yes, all that land in France. And so now they're battling back and forth, and they're going to do it for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're going to fight over that. So there's all these efforts, and Isabella is one. Again, women are just a what? Pawn in the whole thing. Exactly. Women are just a pawn in the politics of royals and the monarch at this time. So we've got Isabella of France, and she is definitely understanding her duty. She knows what her responsibility is, and she's accepting her responsibility, and she's ready for it. She's been trained her whole life to do this. Now, ultimately, when Edward Longshanks dies en route to battle again in Scotland, right? They send a messenger, they send a knight to go find his son, of course, because what does he have to tell him? You are now the king. That's exactly right. You are now the king. And you remember that his father did not immediately go claim the crown. Remember that? He went to the Pope, and he went to France, and he took care of these things. Well, young Edward did the same thing. He waited. He had some business that he had to take care of before he could go and claim his inheritance, before he could go and claim his birthright. And the very first thing that he did as king was to get Gaveston back. That's the very first thing that he did. He didn't go run to get coronated. He didn't make amends with any strained relationships. He didn't do anything like that. He sent someone right away to France to find Gaveston and tell him that he can come back. And so that's exactly what happened. Now, he is going to eventually go and get crowned, and there's going to be a coronation, and he's married to Isabella, correct? So the coronation is for who? Both of them, right?
Both of them.
Yeah. So now England has a new king and queen. And the new king and queen are going to be crowned, and we've got this new sense of pageantry. Remember what Longshanks did? There's a new sense of pageantry, and so there's going to be this great feast after, during this coronation of the two, except this was really bizarre. It starts out okay, they're crowned, but headed into the feast, we have Gaveston there, all right? And bizarrely, he is dressed in royal purple. Okay, why is purple so rare and special that only royals can wear it? Does anybody know?
Dye.
It's a dye that
Dye.
It's a very expensive dye. Yes, yep, it's a very expensive dye. So only royals can wear it. Not only is Pierce wearing the royal purple, but coming into the hall where the feast is, Gaveston is walking in front of the king and queen. He is ahead of the king and the queen. And then in the hall, there's hanging banners, you know, the crests, except the crests are Gaveston's and Edward's. They're supposed to be Edward's and who?
His wife.
Isabella. Her banners are not there. They're not there. It's Gaveston. Oh my gosh, it was just so bizarre. And then throughout the whole feast, Edward is chatting and laughing and joking with,
Gaveston.
and Isabella is stoically seated next to him, but she may as well have been completely invisible. He never once looked her way or acknowledged her presence. It was as if she just did not exist at all. And so the French dignitaries that were there stood up and left and made a show of it, made a show of their absolute disdain and disgust for this display. Not a good, yes, exactly, not a good way to get started. But it wasn't just the French nobility that was upset about this bizarre behavior. Who else was upset? The English nobility, yes, they were very upset about all of this too. And now it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It doesn't get better. So Edward, because he's so very, very, very fond of Pierce, he's decided that he's going to give him this land. He's going to give him this land, all right? He's going to make him the Earl of Cornwall. And do you know that this land was supposed to go to his cousin, a royal? Of course it was. It was not supposed to go to the best buddy of the king. It was supposed to go into the family, but it didn't. He gives this land to Gaveston. All right, now as these things are happening and time's going by, everybody is getting very upset about this, and also Gaveston has got tighter and tighter and tighter rein on the king. So who is running the country? Excellent, yes, that's exactly right. Gaveston is running the country. Are the barons going to be upset about this?
Yes.
They absolutely are. So enter Thomas. He's a Plantagenet. Thomas Plantagenet. He's the second Earl of Lancaster. He is the wealthiest man in the country. He owns so much land. He had his inheritance, and then when people passed on, he added to that inheritance. He winds up being the wealthiest man in the country. He is the cousin of the king. He's a member of the family. He's a first cousin of the king. And yet he is so furious and he's so worried about what's going to happen to his country that he gets the other barons together, and he can because he's got power, doesn't he? And they're going to listen to him. And so they come up with something called the Lord's Ordainers, or the ordinances. The ordinances. Now, these ordinances put even stricter, look at, here's all the signatures down here, see? These ordinances put more limitations on the king. Magna Carta did what?
Set up on
Limited power brought in, folded in authority for the landowners, the barons, and now we've got ordinances because Edward II is so bad. He needs even more detailed limitations on him, all right? And we have one of the ordinances, 20, Article 20, specifically mentions Gaveston. They need him out, right? Because he's got way too much influence on the king, and so he has to leave the country. This is one of the ordinances that they force Edward to sign or stamp his seal. And so if once Gaveston's exiled, if he returns, if he comes back into the country, he's going to be considered a traitor. And what is the penalty for treason? Exactly, yes. That was a wonderful sound effect. Yeah, very nice sound effect. All right, so he's got to leave the country. If he comes back, he'll die. It's very clear. There's no ambiguity about it. Okay, so now what do you suppose the two men do? What would be the logical thing for those two guys to do?
Hopefully,
Put them in hiding.
You would think that the best thing for them to do, Edward should accept this and move on and run his country, and Gaveston should leave the country and never come back, right?
yeah, that ain't gonna happen.
So of course that's what they did, correct?
No.
No, such was their friendship.
Quotation mark.
Such was their friendship that they decided they would make a little, gesture of his leaving. Like Edward's going to agree to all of this, and it'll seem like Pierce has left, but he comes back, right? Because they just can't stay away from each other. And when he comes back, what happens?
They get married.
He said they get married.
They get married.
No, he's captured. They capture him. Yeah, they capture him. Now they've, yes. So they capture him, and because they have this signed or sealed ordinance, there is a kind of a quick trial. Let's say we'll call it a trial. All right, there's some nobility there, but it wasn't exactly how things normally go. He wasn't able to defend himself. He was not able to speak. Actually, so there's this quick kind of thing that they're calling a trial, and then he is sentenced to what? He's sentenced to execution, yes. So Lancaster, and it's Lancaster, Edward's cousin, he's going to take him to land. Blacklow Hill is on Lancaster land, all right? And there they execute him. And this is a monument on the spot. Well, the king didn't know about it. They captured him, and the king doesn't know about it until after it has happened. That's why they have to have this quick trial and quick execution. It happened that fast So thank you, Pat. I didn't make that clear, so thank you. So this is the monument on the very spot where he lost his life, and this does not go over well with the people because it was sketchy. It was really sketchy. And there's a plaque on this monument, and I've got a close-up of it. All right, can you read that? So it doesn't seem like, yeah, the people weren't crazy about Galveston, but they weren't crazy about how this all played out either. They didn't think that that was the right way to do things, and it wasn't. It wasn't. It was a political play, and they did not follow their system of justice. They made some kind of nod to justice. We're all kind of caught up in the relationship between Edward and Pierce. So what about Isabella? Well, you will probably be glad to know that they do have children. Well, they have children, so I'm gonna move this along here. So they have children. Okay, so they've got 4 children, but they have an heir. All right, so there's a son, and they have an heir. So thankfully that has happened. All right, but there's the heir to the throne. That's a lot of stuff going down on to the king, right? Do you think he's really popular with the people right now? No. So he feels like he's got to do something. He needs to do something. He has to redeem himself in the eyes of, well, his counterparts, but also his subjects. And so he's got a brilliant idea. Hey, my dad was in a great battle in Scotland, and it's been a long time. I almost forgot about that. I could go back to Scotland, and I could just settle the issues that are there. Isn't that a great idea? So he goes up to Scotland, and he's got an army with him. Now, his army is twice the size of Robert the Bruce's army, but guess who wins? It's humiliating. It's an absolute humiliating loss because he's got a much bigger force, but he loses. So now he's got to go back, and he goes back, and there's more bad news. There's more bad news. It is right at this same time that the weather is kind of crazy, and we have flooding. And when there's flooding, what happens to your crops? All right, so this is the great famine. Yeah, this is the great famine of that time during his reign. All right, during his reign. So now he's really desperate, right? Nothing's going well. Everything's going really badly. And so he needs that somebody. Remember how Galveston was the one that was in charge and making all the decisions? He needs that somebody. Well, there is someone waiting in the wings that is aware of the need of this particular king. He and his father, they're both named Hugh. They both have Hugh Sr. and Hugh the Younger. So Hugh Despenser is the younger one, is the one that really got his claws into Edward. All right, so they come on the scene because they can see that the time is ripe for them to kind of get in there and take over. And it is exactly what happens. The king wants this same kind of relationship that he had with Galveston, and he wants to let these 2 men take over and run things for him. And so he just lets them get away with anything and everything. He starts giving them lands that belong to who? The barons, yes. When he does that, what's going to happen? It's almost like Edward cannot see beyond his nose. He can't see beyond his nose. He just knows what he wants in the moment, and what he needs in the moment, and he can't think beyond that. He can't predict what his actions are going to create. It's interesting. It's interesting to study people like this. All right, so now Thomas, who is his cousin, okay, the Earl of Lancaster, powerful man, is going to raise up armies against Edward and the Despensers, and they do, but because the Despensers have become so powerful, right, they are able to round up the barons, okay? And not only do they round up the barons, but they take their wives and their children, and they imprison the women and the children, because these people are, there's nothing that isn't too foul for them to do in order to get their power. So they are rounding everybody up. The women and children are in prison. Some of the women are executed, but all of the barons are executed, including Thomas, the Earl of Lancaster, the cousin of the king, is executed. They are all executed. The Despensers want everybody out of the way. They don't want anything to stand in the way of total and complete power. But one guy escapes. One of the barons escapes. His name is Roger Mortimer, and he escapes and gets himself to France. Now, while this is all happening, there's a dispute in France, okay? The dispute is over Gascony. And there's a new king has come to power. The new king has come to power. This is Charles. There's a threat of war through Charles and this dispute over land. Now the Despensers take this situation and they're thinking to themselves, we got rid of everybody that had any authority over the king. There's only one person left who might have authority over the king. Who would that be? His wife. Excellent. His wife. But she is Isabella of where? France. And if she's from France and there's a threat of war with France, what is she according to the Despensers?
She's a threat.
She's an enemy. She's an enemy. Now, this Isabella, this is the same one who stoically sat there while her husband completely ignored her, right? That she's been living with this man, that she's been giving birth to his children, doing all of the things that she's supposed to do. There are other stories about her where she was 100% supporting her husband, despite the fact that he just disregarded her at every turn. Now, they've called her an enemy of the state. They have removed her children from her, removed her lands, and removed her household servants, who are like family to you because they're the people, you know.
Yeah.
All right. It would be like your staff here at Hunt Community if they came and removed us, right? That they remove all of that. Does her husband, the king, do anything to stop the Despensers while they're doing that to his wife?
No.
He does nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Her children are gone. All right? So now, Isabella, she's done, right? She's had it. She's going to go to France, okay? She's going to go to France, and she's going to be working on a treaty between France and England, because who is Charles IV to her? Her brother. Remember, she is Isabella of France in an arranged marriage with her father and Edward Longshanks, right? So now that her father's passed away, the new king of France is her brother. Charles IV is her brother. So now she's going to go to France. They've got her kids, they've got her home, they've got everything. She goes and she is going to broker a deal, all right, with her brother. She comes up with a treaty that's acceptable to both sides, except for one piece of it. It is requiring that Edward come to France and pay homage to the king. Just like everybody's supposed to, correct? Just like his father did. All right. Now, what do you think Edward decided to do?
Not so.
He decided to not go. Yes, he decided to not go. And you know what? I think that was the plan all along. I think that was the plan all along. Because what they did in response to that, the reply was, okay, fine, if you're not able to come, then could you send your heir instead? Aha, yes, you see the brilliance here. Can you send the heir, my son, send my son an heir, and that will be sufficient if he pays homage to the king, his uncle. That would be his uncle. And so Edward and the dispensers, who are really in charge, guess what they do?
They did send them.
They sent him. They sent him. They were probably like, wow, I can't believe he actually did that. So now the Queen of England and the heir to the throne of England are both together in France. With the support of who? The king, exactly. And there's somebody else there that you should know about, all right? Do you remember Mortimer,
Oh, he's there.
the baron that escaped? Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the baron that escaped and went to France. He's there, and she's there, and guess what?
They fall in love.
They fall in love. Yes, they fall in love. I think after all this time, she deserves to be happy. What do you think? Right? I think she should have a little happiness. Absolutely. All right, so they fall in love, and together, is he as motivated as she is to go get these dispensers, right? Yeah, she's probably just as motivated. All right, so now they put together an enormous army. They get to England with the enormous army, and guess what they're able to do?
They got rid of the dispensers.
Yes, yes.
Off with their head.
Hugh Sr. and Hugh Jr., they capture them and they execute them brutally, and I won't share.
No, you won't share.
All right, I won't, because I know, I'm sorry, and it's disappointing, Effie. But most people don't want me to tell.
I like that.
I know, Effie, you love that stuff. I know you do. I'll tell you later. All right, so they get them, but what about Edward? What about Edward? Because who do they have with them? The heir to the throne, and so they can force Edward to abdicate, right? They can force him to abdicate, and he does. Actually, his son said, they were deposing the king, and his son said, I want to do this the right way. And so Edward came and officially abdicated to his son, which, I don't know, there's something super sad about that. All right, so now we have officially Isabella of France, and she is known as what?
She will.
Yes, she is known as the she-wolf. Now, she raised an army. She did all the right things. She did everything she was supposed to do. And it didn't get her anything but absolute disregard and heartbreak. And so once she could no longer take that, she saw her opportunity. She rescued her son. She raised an army. She marched into England. She was responsible for deposing the King of England, which had never happened before, and took over. She took over. Edward is imprisoned, and he's going to be moved around a lot because, of course, there are loyalists that are going to try to free him. All right, he winds up in the Berkeley Castle, and he dies there a very mysterious, well, controversial death.
Better than a divorce.
Down with the queen.
No, well, it's controversial because, all right, so there's 3 different stories. So one of the stories, the most unlikely story, is that he didn't die, that was a fake, and that he lived on. And then there's a story that he was not treated very well, but kind of kept living, kept going, despite not being treated very well. And so what they did was that he was murdered by using a hot poker.
Don't tell.
All right, can you guess?
I guess.
And then the third thing is that he died of natural causes, but because he was treated so badly. All right, that he died of natural causes, but they were brought on by mistreatment. However, there are receipts. You know, the boring paperwork tells you so much, but there's receipts of luxury items going into the castle for his care. So it's very controversial. Nobody really knows what happened to him. Now, do you think Edward II is worse than bad King John?
In some ways.
Toss up?
Not quite.
A toss up? Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? It's hard to decide. But you know, this up until right now is like the normal story. From here on out, it's going to get a little crazy. And we're going to start that next week. We're going to start the really crazy stories next week, and I'm going to tell you all about the death of the Black Prince and how that changed everything. All right? Okay, thank you for coming, and I will see you next week.